questions to you. And as she was talking, then I thought about what a colleague sent me last week about the country making pronouncements outside Zimbabwe that they are going to be launching. It's called stabilization plan, and and these policies actually are pronounced somewhere outside Zimbabwe. No one from this country knows about them. Even the one that I was talking about earlier on, the upper middle income, program, is also, you hear it coming from Davos, somewhere from New York, but here in the country, they don't talk about these policies. So as you engage, maybe let's also touch on this.
Thank you very much, and once again, hello everyone. I'm going to just share briefly around building a people-centered economy. And like you have said, I think if you go on the next slide, my discussion with you I would want to look at three phases or contexts. Just before the elections, then the November to July, then July to now, to where we are. And I was saying that we have not had conversations at the local level. Like you are saying, conversations are happening elsewhere in terms of moving this economy. The economic reform agenda is being framed somewhere else where the citizens are not residing or are not on that table. I remember Dr. Munyeza saying you can be on the table or at the table. So we are being on the table somewhere to discuss our future, to discuss the economy that we want. And the citizens, we've been left out, and at some point we have to jump in, if we have to jump in, or we'll let the bus pass and suffer, or things like that. But it is all up to us to then decide and say we are the citizens and we are the rights holders, and we want to move forward and frame the kind of economy that we want, that would work for us. And this is the people-centered economy that we are talking about today. You can move on to the next slide. So there I was just trying, I think our economy is like a patient with so many signs and symptoms of sickness. And there is the pre-election, just before we went into the elections. This is kind of the issues that we were facing. If we had an economy that was on autopilot, no one accountable for running the economy, a lot of corruption, lack of fiscal transparency, issues of tenderpreneurship. I think we know where public officials and some business people were colluding and siphoning our state-owned enterprises. Fiscal indiscipline, fiscal imbalance, and the issue of no currency and the cash shortages that we have witnessed in our economy, and the distortions then thereof. And these distortions, normally, the people who suffer are those that are vulnerable. Some of the groups that, for example, Sakile was talking about, the women, the youth, people with disabilities. When we are having these distortions because of the fiscal indiscipline and fiscal imbalances and the limited or constrained fiscal space that we have, then the vulnerable are likely to suffer. I think I will not belabor around the high unemployment rate. I was just thinking that at independence we said we had an enclave economy. But this enclave economy was such that there was an informal sector, but not and the formal sector. But now the converse part of it is we now have a bigger informal sector than the formal sector. It was enclave before, but the formal sector was running. But now we are running an informal sector that is also not supported, that is not receiving the government support that it deserves, so that maybe those that are in the informal sector can then grow to be entrepreneurs. I think 94% of the Zimbabwean population of the labor force, according to studies, especially from the labor force studies, show that 94% of the people of Zimbabwe in the labor force are employed in the informal sector. State abrogation of duty to provide social services, and 70% of population living below the poverty determined line, and increasing vulnerabilities. I think we've spoken about vulnerabilities. And coming from ZIMCODD, I'll talk about the debt is we have a debt overhang of about 18 billion, 74% of the GDP. Negative national savings, which means we also borrow for consumption, just for what we eat. Because when we talk about debt, we're not saying maybe debt is wrong, but what are we borrowing for? How are we borrowing? Are we following our laws? Are we channeling the resources to where we can instigate that there be development? And I think within this also framework, we saw poor quality investments, mainly from the east, because of the Look East policy, where we saw, for example, the issue of labor conditions deteriorating, extractivism, environmental degradation, and looting of resources within the pre-election. But we can go back to the 1980s and also talk about ASAP and the like, leading to this sickness, the comatose kind of economy that we had just prior to the elections. You can move on. Okay, then post-November Mugabe, or post-Mugabe context, I think what we witnessed is a militarized economy, I would say. And there I say command versus a model economy. So where there is command, definitely we don't see the citizen involvement. It's something that is just shoved down your throat. This is the route we are going to take. This is what we are going to do. And the militarization of the economy has got its own okay, people cannot hear. Okay, thank you. Though like I indicate when Mugabe left, or the military intervention came about, there was hope that things are going to work. Now Mugabe has gone. And also the new administration that came to save until July promised us a lot. They were going to deal with the cash issues. They promised jobs. They did 100-day plans, over ambitious, but nothing really happened. But we saw rapid shifts in terms of international re-engagement, where the government wanted to open new credit lines, foreign direct investments, under the Zimbabwe's Open for Business mantra. They also wanted then to prepare the voter in terms of voting for them in July. We saw quite a number of developmental frameworks as well being launched. Like you have said, Mike, we saw, for example, being an upper middle income country by 2030. We saw an investment policy for the country being launched in Davos and shared with investors in Davos. We also saw some improvements maybe around the national budget allocations, where 5 of those top ministries were in the social services and agriculture, promises around a modernized economy, dealing with the debt overhang and the like. But we didn't see, a conclusion to a number of issues, especially around dealing with corruption and nipping corruption and ensuring that we eliminate this. I think we saw, for example, just some steps around moratorium for those that looted the economy, but nothing conclusive really. Some public officials arrested because of looting and destroying the economy and the corruption that was bleeding the resources from the economy, but nothing much happening. But one thing that I also wanted to highlight was the increase or the ballooning of the domestic debt during that November to now. Before November, our domestic debt was at 4 billion. But right now, as we speak, it's at 7.7 billion. And this just happened in November to now. And there is no fiscal transparency in terms of what was happening then between November and July to balloon this domestic debt. But there was issuance of treasury bonds. We saw some new notes of bond, $2 and $5, and we were wondering, are they printing? What is happening? And no one is responsible and accountable in terms of them telling us exactly what is happening. So this is then the post-November period. Then the post-election that we had, I think we had high hopes, but a stubborn economy as well, but high hopes to take off. We wanted an uncontested election result. We wanted everything to move so that we could move on. Because I think of the fatigue that we are talking about, we want to move on. And the fatigue is around, we want the economic fundamentals to be in place so that we can move on and we can live better lives. But unfortunately, we got a contested election result and an economy as well that is stubborn, that is proving to be very stubborn to deal with. the fundamentals remain a challenge. I think we're talking about the parallel market, the distortions that we're talking about, but also a root social service delivery. I think the outbreak of cholera, for example, in Harare was also a rude awakening to say, so what, we don't even have resources to finance such issues that are coming up, very key issues that are threatening human lives and taking lives. Old medieval diseases like cholera, typhoid are killing people within this context, but with high hopes. I think we saw the informal sector. We thought we would see a framework then maybe being put in place within the frameworks that we have put in so that there is inclusion. But then there is nothing that has happened, but instead there is victimization and skirmishes within the informal sector to remove them. So we now start asking ourselves about even the Zimbabwe is open for business issue, to say, it's open for business. Who is supposed to come and invest? Are we also as Zimbabweans supposed to invest within this economy if we are talking about it being people-centered? So I think I will not attempt, but there was an extension, I think, of what we had heard in November, continued now, but with confidence, because there is some legitimacy in terms of we've gone for the elections, now we can really do this. So there is some feeling of legitimacy from the government to now move on with the neoliberal agenda, the market-based economy, and continue to call on investors to come to Zimbabwe. But like I said, those were more like all the signs and the symptoms of an economy that is ailing. And I said there that our economy, or the vine, continued to be spoiled by two little foxes. And I've identified this as lack of stewardship, which is a fox which batters and robs the economy of the much needed resources for our development. There is no accountability, there is primitive accumulation from the ruling elites and those in the private sector. There is no protection and provision for the citizens. The rent-seeking behavior as well of the state, I think, is one key issue that we also see, and that is contributing to the problems that we have. And the exposure to market-based economy shocks without a proper framework of saying how do we mobilize our own domestic resources for the benefit of the citizens. From the citizen side, I picked that there is limited citizenship. And this fox preys on the social contract between those who govern and the governed. And then it also preys on the potential to break the hearts of inequalities and vulnerabilities and disparities in the economy. When the citizens are resilient, because we are survivalists as Zimbabweans, we don't really, but we are disempowered and we are patronized as well. We tend to be excluded from decision-making processes, and we are alienated. Like I said, conversations are happening and taking place elsewhere around this economy, and we are here and we are the victims who are counting the social and economic costs. Just quickly so that I can... there we say, so how do we build these economic ruins towards a people-centered economy? And my basis was that primarily we have a good constitution in terms of provisions to move forward on the economy. And we have for example, section 13 from subsection 1 to 4, which talks about the inclusion of citizens in the economy, the empowerment of citizens as well in the economy, and even issues of communities must benefit from the resources and be participating in the developmental plans that are developed both at the local levels but also at the national levels, and will build our economy from the local economies through to the national economies. I think that is one of the slides that I just put there. That at least our constitution should be, as you can move on, should be our basis in terms of ensuring that we create an economy that is not just an economy for the investors. For the government, I said the provisions in the constitution around citizens' inclusion to build an economy must be the cardinal points in terms of moving this economy forward. And an economy created for investors, private investors, is a violation of fundamental founding principles that we're talking about citizenship and citizen inclusion. And an economy that we want moving forward, and I think also answering to Mike's question, we do not necessarily need an upper middle income country. Like you said, the gap between the rich and the poor will continue to widen. What we need is an economy that is poverty eliminating for Zimbabwe, that creates employment, that is intensive on employment creation, that focuses not necessarily on the broader GDP, but the GDP per capita, to say how much did this economy contribute in terms of the health sector per person? How much are you getting per year as an individual? And I was just calculating that and saying this economy per year is giving an individual $21 per year for your health provision. And then if you're talking about being an upper middle income country, they've even said, I heard in Washington where the president was addressing and saying the GDP per capita has actually increased because from 900 to 1,500, but where is it? It's not working for the people. The numbers and economic growth that is only in quantity but does not look at quality will not work. So we need to move away from only dealing with the quantitative aspects to the quality of the economy and the provisions that we are getting. Resource allocation, I think I've just tried to summarize those little boxes there to say we need to move from quantity to quality. This is when we can start talking about a people-centered economy. For the civil society, I was saying we are also contributing in terms of the lack of the stewardship and also the limited citizenship. I think the issues of elitism, discussing at a very high level issues of the economy and leaving out the real people. In some instances, from all these epochs that I've spoken about, the pre-election, the whatever, we have had our own discussions without the people that are affected the most. And we have kind of taken the ownership and replaced that voice. And this is what we need to now psych in terms of this active citizenship and ensuring that they hold the duty bearers or the government accountable to build a people-centered economy. There's also a vacuum that I'm talking about there, that we have also created the civil society organizations. I think from all these phases that I was talking about, we concentrated on civil and political rights and left out the social and economic rights and issues of the economy, leaving that vacuum of talking about the bread and butter issues for us to frame a democratic economic reform agenda, and we need to disentangle ourselves from that. Then the centrality and peripheral involvement. I think we have involved, a civil society when we say we have met with the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on budgets and we feel we are satisfied. But what are we doing at the community level in terms of influencing local communities, the periphery? And then we have an opportunity like Sakile has highlighted, there's the devolution that is being spoken about. These are opportunities and mechanisms that are there now for us to engage at the local level and build from the centrality to the peripheral so that there is that convergence of issues as we build the people-centered economy. I think I have just two last slides. Yeah.
That's fine, a minute.
Okay. So together we can definitely, I think if the government does its role and the CSOs does its role and also the citizens do their role, we can build this economy. And our agenda must consistently and continuously empower citizens. This is what we should work on doing. We should work on creating spaces at the local level, like I've indicated, supporting citizens' coalitions and alliances that can enhance capacities to resist and respond to economic and social shocks, but building also the public accountability framework for the citizens so that we have a people-centered economy where we can be able to hold our duty bearers accountable. And this will result in an organic people-centered economy that can address the citizens' real issues, needs and rights. And this I was just talking about, we have spoken about a lot of, for example, infrastructure development. We want roads, we want this. But the cholera, for example, outbreak, it showed us that there are priorities, there are things that we actually have to prioritize. Yes, we need the roads. Yes, we need all the modernization of our infrastructure. But just the basics, our economy should focus on the basics, such as just the provision of water, the provision of health services. These are the basics that maybe the infrastructure and modernization of the economy is not an aspiration at this point in time, but just the basic rights of citizens is also what we have to focus on. Last. So in conclusion, I think I've said this elsewhere. At the current engagements that are going on, we are moving towards having an economy that is ruthless, that is voiceless, that is futureless, that is jobless as well, because we are not seeing how the government is intending to ensure that there is inclusion of where the people are, where the informal sector, that is where the people are. So how are we going to create proper, decent jobs within that economy? Within the rural areas, the rural setups, within the manufacturing industry and all this. So we will head towards having that ruthless, jobless, futureless, destroying our environment, because we are opening up for business. We are opening up our economy. But I think what we need, the principles that we need are, one, the issue of building people-centered economy, issues of sustainability, and a democratic economic reform agenda that has got genuine consultations of the citizens. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. The danger of people using slides is that sometimes it's difficult to stop them because they need to finish. Nonetheless, Janet takes it from where Sakile left, the issue of moving on, but having people left out.